The second part of this discussion will be about the classification of the international organizations, and I will finish by telling you several thoughts about the principles of functioning. The classification of international organization is possible in different way. We can classify international organization by their territory, by their subjects, by their fields, material fields, or by functional criteria. And I think this is the last criteria is very important to understand. I would like to I want you to know very well this third criteria. The first criteria of classification is territorial classification. The international organizations can be classified by their territorial fields. The most important distinction is about universal organizations and regional organizations. Universal organizations, we can give the example of the United Nations, or the United Nations, which is the Organization of United Nations. Yusuf, can you cut off your microphone, please? Never mind. Okay, the United Nations, Universal Organization. There are other examples of universal organizations. For example, you have the International Labor Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. So when every member state, every member of the world can accede to the organization, which are open organizations. We call them open organizations. The international organization, is considered as universal organization. The other type of territorial distinction of organizations is regional international organizations. For example, we have the European Council, Council of Europe. More precisely, more correctly, you have to say Council of Europe, to not confuse with European Council, which is another institution of the European Union. So Council of Europe is a regional organization also. European Union is a regional organization. African Union is a regional organization. Mercosur is a South American economic organization, Mercosur. And ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is a regional organization. These can be qualified as closed organization, regional organization. Only regional countries can accede to the membership of those organizations. The second type of classification is the classification on the criteria of the field of the organization. We can have different organizations in different fields. For example, economic organizations, military organizations, or cultural organizations. The example to economic organization is the European Union, the only integrative organization, the economic integration, and the sole international organization which realized the economic integration. And then we have other types of economic organizations, as, for example, International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, etc. In the military field, we have, of course, NATO and the Association of African Air Forces, for example, and cultural organization, we have UNESCO, as you know, all of you. Which is important for me is the last criteria of distinction of classification of international organizations. I would like you to note very carefully the functional distinction of organizations, and the distinction between cooperative organizations, which are classical cooperation organizations, and intergovernmental organizations, and integrative organizations. In classical international law, which means the law of relations between sovereign states, all international organizations are considered as cooperational organizations. They are mostly intergovernmental organizations, which means that decision making is depending mostly from the intergovernmental organs of the institution, of the international organization. For example, at the United Nations. United Nations is an intergovernmental organization. The decisional process is mainly based in the will of states. The decisions of Security Council only are mandatory. So those decisions of the Security Council can be blocked by veto of one of 5 permanent member states. So there's a intergovernmental cooperation. The sovereignty of states is very much respected, and the decision making is based also on unanimity or diplomatic negotiation between intergovernmental authorities. The second type, the integrative, the opposite type of international organization, are integrative organization, but there is only one, the European Union, the only integrative mechanism. The European Union is not a simple intergovernmental cooperation organization. It is integrative organization. It means that decision-making process is based not only on the representation of governments of member states, but also, and maybe especially, on institutions which are not representatives of governments. For example, the European Commission is not a representative of national governments. It's independent organ of the European Union. The commissioners are independent from national governments, and they are acting, they are deciding on the basis of the only interest of the European Union. It's likely for the European Parliament. European Parliament is not an organ, not an institution representing national governments, but it is the institution representing national populations. It is elected directly by people, so it is representing the democracy of the legitimate democracy of the European Union. And we can also tell the same thing for the European Court of Justice, which is not a representative of the governments, which is not an intergovernmental organ of the European Union, which is independent from national governments. Judges are inamovible. It means judges are nominated not by governments, but the integrative institutions of the European Union, especially after a hearing of the European Parliament. So judges European judges of the European Union are independent from national governments, and all those organs which are not representative of national governments shows us that the mechanism of functioning of the European Union is different from classical cooperative international organizations. And then we can also look at specific legal principles of this organization, or substantial rules of the European Union, and we will always remark that, note that the European Union is the aim of not simple cooperation, diplomatic cooperation, but a real integration between national systems. For example, the European citizenship, the European currency, those are elements explaining, or the principle of primacy, principle of direct effect, etc. Those are elements indicating that the European Union is distinct from the classical international law organization. So we can have we also, as European jurists, we consider that the European legal order is a distinct legal order than the international classical legal order. The last point for my lesson today is some remarks about principles of functioning of international organizations, to give you a general view of those principles of functioning. I think the most important principle that you must note is the principle of conferral that I invoked several times in that lesson. Principle of conferral means that the international organization has no sovereignty, but only competencies attributed by the founding treaty. So the international organization applies only competencies delivered by national states, by sovereign states to this organization. So the international organization cannot act out of its field of competence. Otherwise, this act will be considered as illegal and will be annulled. So this is the consequence of rule of law applied in the international organization. But note that also that this principle of conferral is interpreted extensively, largely. It's a flexible principle. So we have, for example, the theory of implied powers in international law, theory of implied powers, which means that even though there's no text about a specific competency, for example, for the competencies, judicial competencies of the international organization. For example, there's no specific provision in the founding treaty about the ability of the international organization to seize, to go before a judge. Those competencies, those administrative and institutional secondary competencies can be admitted even though there is no specific provision in the founding treaty. It is, for the example, before the Permanent Court of Justice, Permanent Court of International Justice advisory opinion in 1922. It's a very old principle, so you can see it's a principle that we have since 1922, this advisory opinion of the Permanent Court of International Justice about the International Labour Organization. International Labour Organization, its field of competence is the working people, but there is no specific provision in the ILO founding treaty about the agricultural workers. So there was a litigation between agriculture workers and the state, and the Permanent Court of Justice rendered an advisory opinion telling that the worker, the concept of worker under the ILO is also includes agricultural workers. So we understand that this is an implied power of the ILO, to regulate also workers which are not industrial workers, but which are also agriculture workers. This is the first principle. It's a very important principle, distinctive principle of international organization, principle of conferral, distinctive principle of international organization from states. There are other types of functioning principles. For example, there is a principle of legal personality, which means that normally all international organization has legal personality. So there is no international organization without personality. But here also we make a we make also extensive interpretation, large interpretation of the notion of the legal personality. For example, there's one organization which has no legal personality, but we consider it as an organization, even though it has no legal personality. It is the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe. This OSCE. The OSCE is just a platform of negotiation between member states, between European and other states about the security and cooperation in Europe. But even though it has no legal personality, we will consider in legal jurist doctrine that it is also an international organization, or it's an entity, it's an international entity, a platform which can create, which can be considered as a like a international organization. We have other type of example of this, G7, G20, etc. Those groupments of states which are not international organization formally, strict in a strict manner of the word, of the formula, but we can consider that they can have some action in international legal order, so we can take into account those formations which are not formally international organizations, but which can be assimilated by their action, by their impact in international legal order. So there are other principles. For example, I want you to know them only by means of general culture, legal general culture. Those principles, I want you to hear them, but it's not really important for examination because there are some technical principles. For example, in the legal order of the European Union, we have two principles, the subsidiarity principle and proportionality principle, which are mentioned by Article 5 of the Treaty on the European Union, which are also very important for European legal understanding. But for the international law, for our lesson today, it's not really very important, but I want you to know the meaning of the general meaning of those principles. Subsidiarity principle means that the European Union won't take an action if the action at the level of member state is sufficient. For example, if in a how can you say it? If in a sanitary or a health problem, if there's a health problem, the action, if the action of the member state is sufficient, there is no need to the European Union to prepare a harmonization or European legal rule. The proportionality principle is the one which, according to which if the European Union decides to take an action, this action must be limited to what it is necessary to realize the aim, the aim of the action. For example, in the example of sanitary reasons, if it is possible to deal with those problems with non-mandatory measures, with like recommendations or advisory opinions, European Union must not adopt a regulation or a directive in order to harmonize to make an harmonization of on the member states. So this is another principle which I repeat, I want just note that it is existing and the general meaning, and it's enough for me. So this is all I want you to tell about international organizations. I repeat, I think the important point is the distinction between what is an international organization and what a state. And as I told you, there are two main differences. First of all, the process of creation. State is a constitutional entity. An international organization is not a constitutional entity, but an entity created by member states itself. And the second difference, very important, is the sovereignty. International organizations have no sovereignty, but only competencies, unlike states, which are sovereign in the point of view, on the point of view of legal order of international public law. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you next week.